it's this need to preserve. Like, I've got to preserve this, even at the risk of my own well-being, my own life. I've got to preserve it.
I think you can be an extremist for peace, or you can be radicalized towards being respectful to other people. But if you're a terrorist, that means, okay, I'm going to implement terror. I'm going to kill for this reason because I have these norms that I want to force on everyone else.
Right. So an extremist or radicalized in this way, because I hear what you're saying. Like, well, someone could be like, think of like radical faith or radical love or radical generosity, or, we can use that word to make anything extreme, but like extreme in this way of like, no, I'm going to cause harm.
Right.
Do you connect this with cults?
Yes. Cults are very much like that. Although not every cult wants to hurt people. Some cults just want to be left alone. But cults are very authoritarian. So there's someone, or there's a group or a small group that is in charge, and you cannot question that. And a cult might not want to intermingle with society. They might want to be separate from society and see themselves as better than, or something about protecting that bubble. And then the way the bubble is held together is that every single member absolutely adores the authority figure or figures. And then daily, they give of themselves to those leaders. So there's like a constant submissiveness towards the authority. And then because of human nature, I think any of us could fall into that. I don't think it would happen to everybody easily, but I think we have a biological compulsion to go that way. And then again, the reason why I think this is like this, and remember, I'm not religious. I just think that there's something like us that could make us behave like an ant colony, so that we can start behaving like, okay, this is the queen. I'm just a worker. I'm going to do what I need to do for that queen, for that authority figure. I think there's something in us that can make us act like that. And I don't think we're the same as an ant colony, but I think there's a part of us that can make us so that we're so much like an ant colony that we could build pyramids. That you could suddenly get 10. It would take centuries, but you could get thousands of us together, and we start acting like ants and building pyramids. So I think there's a part of us that could go that way. And I call this our zealotry wiring. And again, zealotry doesn't have to be bad, because what if you're zealous towards making, highways around the country that where the cars drive themselves and nobody can get hurt? If you're zealous for that, then that's great. So it depends on what you're zealous for. But when you're zealous, you're so hyper focused on getting something done that takes over even your own self interest, and it's like your number one thing. So for a cult, they're zealous for that authority figure at all costs, and usually the authority figure is if he's not a narcissist, they'll become a narcissist, because if you're surrounded like that, pretty soon you'll start to think, okay, well, whatever my gut feeling is today, that's what's going to happen. So yeah, I think that's what happens with cults, is that you believe that the authority figure should be treated that way, sort of like ants treat a queen. You dedicate your whole life to it. You eat and sleep and think that way, and you think that's normal. And when you meet people out in society who think that you're lost, you shake your head at them, and you're like, oh, they don't get it, And so, yeah, that's very similar to that mindset is very similar to what we study. And again, it doesn't mean violent, because there's people who are in cults who, don't go out to hurt people. But I also don't think that it's healthy. I think, depending on how much the leader requires of other people, I think it can be very unhealthy.
Well, and sometimes too, we do see that escalation. And so I'm kind of curious. I mean, if you think about, I'll pull two big ones that basically everyone's heard of. Let's think about Waco, and let's think about Jonestown. Now, these guys wouldn't have been considered terrorists, right? Because no one was expecting them to do what they did. Now, would they be classified in some way? Like, how does that work, like, after the fact? How would those be categorized now?
I think we still messed this up. I think at a national level, and even at a social level, I think after the fact, people say mental damage. There was some sort of delusions of grandeur, and that screwed them up, and then the other people were just vulnerable, and they got that confused. And so I think after a cult incident blows up and something horrible happens, people say he was a narcissist. He had delusions of grandeur, and then all the other people were confused. But that's not really it. I think if you could go back and hang out with cults, and stay with them for years, you would see people behaving relatively normal. It's just that their whole language and mindset is about loving and adoring that leader at all costs and doing whatever they can for that leader. But other than that, they might still be able to build houses or take care of the sick. And some of them might be doctors and lawyers. And it's just something that kind of takes over the back of their mind. But at the same time, they can still be kind of functional and nice and normal. And, you can have guests and the guests won't think that it's weird. So I don't think that it's mental damage on the part of the leader, and I don't think it's confusion on the part of the people. I honestly think we have a zealotry wiring in our brain that's just like a selfishness wiring. Just like how just like a kid might walk into a cookie store and have some sort of selfishness for the cookies. I think all of us have some sort of availability or vulnerability in our brain where we could say, I want to be part of something where I'm really giving of myself towards something better than me, something more important to me. And if you believe that a certain authority is that person, you could very well fall into line and become one of them, especially if they're all waiting for you to, publicly declare that you're there. And then they'll give you a hug and they'll love you, and you'll really feel this genuine tight bond with the other followers. And then you'll feel an adoration. You'll generally, all the chemicals that go into adoration, you'll generally feel that. So I don't think we handle that right. I think we talk about the people as if they're lesser, mentally less strong, and we talk about the leader as if he was always going to be, as if he was brilliant. And sometimes I think some guys just walk into the right place at the right time, and then over the years they become entitled, and they actually feel like they should be worshipped. And of course, that does do mental damage. But I don't think that cults are the result of somebody who's just brilliant and a narcissist, and he finds a bunch of confused people. I think it's something about human nature where a lot of things have to come into play at just the right way, and then you can fall into line and suddenly be in a cult. And it can feel very normal. The transition in can feel very normal, and even enlightening. And you might say, "I'm so glad that I did this." And so I think that's what happens. Less than mental damage and confusion, more something about our human nature that we should be aware of.
Yeah, it's so interesting, this conformity that can come into play. And when you use like that cookie example, I was thinking
Right.
ultimately, though, the people who are involved, they can end up handing over their cookies. It'd be
Right.
like, I'm getting involved in this, and maybe there's like this appeal at first, and then there's this transition because
Yep.
people can so go without, but then the conformity is at play. And when we're talking, if I'm going to make it a religious cult, because there's different kinds, but if we're going to make it a religious cult, oftentimes there's some sort of eternal significance, and so that's going to add a really significant layer to what's
Right.
going on. And we've got this preservation need. That's a word that came to mind because I can go back into that mentality and think about like, okay, what was it for me? Because I was in one for 20 something years.
Mm-hmm.
And when you were talking about like all of a sudden, if stuff gets more radical or like people will, it's like, it's this need to preserve. Like, I've got to preserve this, even at the risk of my own well-being, my own
Right.
life. I've got to preserve it.
And that's the distinction between zealotry wiring. So one thing that I like to preach, and here I am using Southern Baptist words again. One thing I like to preach is that, so we have this self-interest wiring, which is you walk into the cookie store and you want the cookie, or you drive past a casino and you want to go, make money and see the pretty people, and all the usual vices you can think of. We have the self-interest wiring that draws us to those things. But then we also have like a cooperation wiring, where you might want to just go help someone just because you see somebody who needs something and you just want to go help them, and then that's it. You're not looking for the payback. You're just think, oh, this person needs help, I'm going to go run do it. So we have that wiring. And then we have the zealotry wiring, and that's what you're talking about, where you want to preserve something, but not you. It's something else. And I think this is something that gets mixed up. I think, especially with atheists, some atheists say they do this because of this eternal promise. They're going to get this eternal payoff later. That might be attractive, sort of, but studies show the things that keep the cult together the longest is the individuals of the group have to pay something towards the idea or towards the authority every day. And the more that you do something, the more you give of yourself towards that, like you were saying before, instead of the cookies for me, I'm going to make cookies for them, or I'm going to do things of myself for them. That's the zealotry wiring. And it's opposite of self-interest because you're not taking care of yourself, you're preserving the idea. And that's counter to self-interest, but I think we have all three. And I think biologically, we need to have all three. I think in order to survive, sometimes you have to watch out for yourself, and sometimes you have to give of yourself to others. And sometimes you have to feel like you should. I know a lot of people like to use the word should and ought as a different thing. This is, more of an obligation to others. And you feel like you should. When you're in that zealotry wiring, you feel like you should do that. And I think in a cult, it's I ought to preserve this idea, and it's so important that I'm going to go without, and I'm still going to feel fine. So I think that's what's going on there.
And I think if someone gets to the point where they are like something kind of hits them in the face, like I had that experience,
Right.
like, okay, this is a real string getting pulled. Like
right.
like everything could unravel. And that happened when my dad died. And so I still kind of hung on for a few more years until my mom did. Then it was like, okay, this is kind of irrevocable now. Like, what am I going to do with this?
Right.
But there was this initial, okay, if I do admit or acknowledge or even consider, let's just start there. If I'm even going to consider that maybe this wasn't for real, like it wasn't really what I thought it was,
right,
then everything falls apart.
Yep.
Like, I mean, I've had people come totally understandably and be like, I feel like I've wasted 20 years of my life. Right. And we can work through that because there's things that can be pulled from it. And there's also, just acceptance of various. So that's right. A whole process on its own. But that feeling of, oh my goodness, like I wasted all of this and I behaved in these ways and I gave up these things and like I gave up that career and I didn't marry that person that I actually had feelings for. Or I've made all of these life decisions and now I'm in my 40s, I'm in my 50s, I'm in my 60s and whatever it looks like. And I just feel like I've lost so much time. I've had people say it pretty young, honestly. I've heard people say it like around 30 and it's like, you got so much life left, hopefully. And so like, it's not like all's not lost. There's so much that you can still do in your life that you want to,
right.
But just that feeling of loss. And that can encourage people, of course, to actually hang on longer because that reality to face is just too much. It's overwhelming. It's devastating.
Yeah. And I would say, if I was thinking about it from your point of view, I would say some people leave because they see someone new coming in and they realize what's about to happen. So say somebody's 40 and they see some person walking in, could be a girl or a guy and they're, 18 or 19. And the person in their 40s says, you know what? I know exactly why everyone's so interested, for this person to join. And I know what the next 20 years of their lives are going to be. And they kind of take themselves out of the cult for a second and they put themselves in the mind of that person. And they say, wait a minute, hold on, maybe I can stop this. And there's instances of that where people leave because they see a new, I want to say victim coming in and they suddenly realize that I don't want that for them. And so if someone leaves that at say the 40s or 50s and they're like, what can I do with my life? You could say, well, you've got these other people out there that are, 19 or 20 or, almost said, God forbid, even younger who are getting into these things. You could help, you can help pull them out. You can say, hey, I know what it's like to be your age and to think that this is important. And you might that person might be able to counsel that saves other people from giving their whole lives to these cults, for too long.
Yeah, it's a good point. I've also heard people come forward and say that because they had kids and they're like, I just can't. I'm thinking about someone who shared, like, I had a daughter and it was a very like, male focused group and very much like patriarchal and in a really abusive, messed up. And he's like, there's no way I'm going to let my little baby girl who I'm so in love with be raised in this, to think
Right.
this of herself and to set herself up to be treated this way. And so that was a line and he left.
Right. I think that happens probably a lot.